We are still on cells, but in this lesson we are going to talk about cell transport. And for cell transport, we are talking about how substances are moved from outside the cell to inside the cell, and how substances are moved from inside the cell to outside. For the objective, at the end of this lesson, the students would be able to name processes by which substances are transported into and out of cells. And it's very important for you to have knowledge about eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells, cell membrane, cytoplasm, and also about energy, because all these are going to be relevant as far as this particular topic is concerned. Okay, so let's start. Cell transport. We'll firstly look at the definition of cell transport. So, simply put, cell transport refers to the movement of substances into and out of cells across the cell membrane, because every cell is surrounded by a cell membrane primarily, and so whenever any substance would have to move from outside the cell to inside the cell, it would have to cross the cell membrane. And so also if the substance is moving from inside the cell to outside. But why is it so important for substances to be moved from whether outside the cell to inside or the other way around? It is a means of the cell obtaining nutrients. Every cell needs nutrients, so like the cell needs amino acids, the cell needs glucose and many other nutrients. But these nutrients are normally found outside of the cell. Maybe they are coming from the blood, and these substances would have to cross the cell membrane to enter the cell before the cell can make use of them. So that is the first point, to obtain nutrients. And when the cell also undergoes metabolism and gets a lot of waste in them, these wastes would have to be removed from the cell. And it's by cell transport that these wastes are taken out of the cell. From time to time, some cells also produce some very useful substances like enzymes or hormones, and these substances would have to be taken out of the cell to other parts of the body, especially in the case of multicellular organisms, to other parts of the body, so that these substances can be used for the body's activities. So to secrete useful substances, that is another reason why cell transport is very important. And to also generate ionic gradients for nervous and muscular activity. And finally, we can talk about to maintain suitable pH for enzyme activity. But there are some two subdivisions of cell transport that I would like us to look at. The first of them is passive transport, and the other is active transport. So all the processes that are involved in cell transport can be grouped into either passive or active transport. So we are going to explain these two terms. Let's start with passive transport. So for passive transport, we are talking about movement of substances that depends on concentration gradient. And what do we mean by concentration gradient? Let's look at this. In chemistry, concentration talks about the amount or the number of substances that is found within a specified volume. So here you would see that I have indicated A as one region and B as another region. And there are some molecules that are found in here, in A, and there are molecules that are found in B. In concentration, we are comparing how many of these molecules are found within a specified volume. So for everything to become very simple for us to understand, just imagine that the volume of A is the same as the volume of B. In other words, A and B have the same volume, or have similar volume. But if they have the same volume and you compare the number of molecules that are found in them, so like in the case of A, there are so many of these molecules in A, but fewer of them in B. So that means A is more concentrated than B. A has a higher concentration than B. And whenever we have a situation like this for the cell and its environment, so the cell being one region, the environment of the cell being another region. So whenever we have a situation like this, then we say that concentration gradient exists. So in passive transport, whenever there is concentration gradient, that is when movement of substances would occur. So in situations like this, it does not depend on energy. So as we see here, no energy required. So what are the two main types of passive transport? We can talk about diffusion and we can talk about osmosis. So let me go back to what we have, our image that we have here. It means that in the case of diffusion, for example, since this region A has more of the molecules than region B, the molecules in region A would easily flow from A and enter B until when they are balanced. Right. So it is very simple. Passive transport depends on concentration gradient and no energy is required. So let's move to the next one, which is active transport. And for active transport, we mean that the transport of substances that rather go against concentration gradients. Previously, we looked at passive transport, but that one is down the concentration gradient. So because of difference in concentrations, the substances are going to move from where they are more, that is in simple terms to say where they are more per the same volume, to where they are less. Right. But there's a different situation. Here, the substance rather move against concentration gradient. So they move from where they are less to where they are more. So they move from where the concentration is low to where the concentration is high. More technically to put it. And because of that, it requires energy from the cell. Because it doesn't follow the normal, natural way of movement of things. Naturally, things would have to move from where they are more to where they are less, but you find a situation where they are moving from where they are less to where they are more. And that requires that the cell would use its own energy to pull the substances to itself or to the inside of itself. Right. So let's look at similar image in here. So like we saw in the other situation of passive transport, A has more of the molecules than B. But here, the movement is still going to be in the other way around against the concentration gradient. So if it's going down the concentration gradient, it means the movement will be from A to B. But if it is against concentration gradient, it means the movement would be from B to A. And this is against the concentration gradient. So for the types of active transport, we have endocytosis and exocytosis. Good. This lesson is actually a very short and very simple one. In our subsequent lessons, we are going to pick them one after the other and talk about them. So for passive transport, which we'll be starting with in our next lesson, we'll talk about diffusion, we'll talk about osmosis. Then we'll proceed to active transport and talk about them also one after the other. Right. So that is what we have for this lesson. So in our lesson, we have looked at the meaning of cell transport. Then we have talked about importance of cell transport, and we have talked about types of cell transport. So as we do, let's take these few questions and try them. 1. Why is diffusion a passive transport? Then 2. You list 2 types of active transport. 3. You describe concentration gradients as applied to cell transport. Good. So, like I said, next we are going to look at passive transport and we'll be starting with diffusion. Okay. So, let's meet in our next lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you always be alerted whenever our videos are released. See you.